Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a couple weeks here. Been doing a lot of work and a lot of video research for some videos, including this one here. I know I'm a little bit late for the Halloween aspect, but we're going into some graveyards in a sense today, cemeteries, more specifically burial mounds. And we see these quite often in fantasy and games and stuff. Well known. I mentioned Skyrim a lot, Elder Scrolls a lot. Obviously, the burrows in there, barrows, excuse me, in there are pretty common. Where you get the draugr and you have tombs. A lot of times you'll have the word walls in there. A lot of good loot, and they're common throughout Dungeons and Dragons and other role playing games. So what I really wanted to do was showcase some of those and also kind of show what I have in my novels of the Carolingian age, because that's part of the culture as well. It's actually part of a lot of cultures. We know them to be in very many cultures of the world historically, and we see tombs, mausoleums, and burial mounds throughout the world. Most famously, the Egyptian tombs, the pyramids, but also you have in the Valley of the Kings what kind of equates to burial mounds. Very much more hidden than what we'll see in Northern Europe and in Asia. And there's a lot, and a lot of people kind of look at them as being older and something more ancient, something very medieval, but not really. They are still up until the 19th century. They were still pretty common in various cultures. So we're going to take a look at that and hope you enjoy. So let's get started. So what is, and you probably noticed I have a little bit different setup today. So my eyes are looking up. I'm looking around. The camera's right there. And my microphone's over here. I got a new microphone. So hopefully it doesn't sound like crap. So what is a burial mound? What are we looking at? This is probably one of the most famous non-Egyptian and probably Northern European. And I say that Northern European is actually British. So it's in England. One of the most famous Sutton Howe. And it is actually a collection of burials. So a lot of people attribute to one particular burial, but it's actually several burial mounds. It's a burial site, and that was pretty common as well. Again, we see that with the Valley of the Kings. We see that in other areas, and that's pretty widespread for a lot of cultures. Is to have multiple kings or important people buried at one site. It's pretty common. And usually, that site held significance for some reason. You'll see that in a lot of in the Inca and the South American indigenous peoples cultures. They had various places that were very, very revered, and that's where they would actually place their sacrifices or their burials. Here is, again, we see this. This is the burial mound. These are pretty low mounds, so it's not the same aesthetic that you'll see in Egypt or in other places, but it's still something that's very commonplace for this culture. This being the Anglo-Saxon style culture of England. And so let's take a look at a couple others. We're going to take a look at a really, really ancient one. This is Maze Howe. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. It's in Orkney, which is, I guess, now would be considered, or I guess now is northern Scotland. At one point, part of Norway, the Norwegian held lands. But this is probably about a 4,000-year-old mound. It's a Neolithic mound. So this is a very different than what you would see in the Anglo-Saxon culture, but it's similar in certain aspects. Anglo-Saxon culture was a little bit more simple, whereas this actually had, and I got a cross section of it. This actually had an entrance, whereas the Anglo-Saxon was they built it, they made it a burial, and that was it. They kind of left. They gave you your stuff that you need in the afterlife. Grave, what we would consider grave goods, could be your sword, different tools that you would use, weapons, in some cases a boat, armor. And this one here, though, it has a little bit more depth to it, quite literally. But this one here, they estimated to be built around 2800 BC. So we're talking long before the Anglo-Saxons, long before the Romans. We're talking long time. So sorry, my apologies. Now, again, like with a lot of ancient sites, there is alignments here. We're talking about this one's aligned. So the rear wall of the central chamber, and then you'll see kind of some layouts here in a little minute, is actually illuminated by the sun of the winter solstice. And that was pretty common for a lot of cultures. You see that in Stonehenge, you see that in Mayan cultures, you see that even up until the Middle Ages. The solstice days were very important, winter solstice being one of the hugely important ones. But obviously the seasons and the sun was definitely something that was very important. Now, this is what you would also be considered a chamber tomb. And now that's something I'm going to get into, because that is very common in D&D, in fantasy literature, fantasy genre, video games and stuff like that. So we're going to get more into that. Okay, so I did promise a cross section of the Maze Howe burial chamber. So here, obviously, you have the entrance you see here, and then the actual chamber here. So this is definitely a little bit more in depth than some of the other burial mounds you'll see, because this actually has an entranceway, a chamber, and leaving it illuminated to the point where it can be illuminated on certain days kind of gives an idea that there was a purpose besides just burying somebody. There was some reason that they wanted to bury the person there. So that's definitely pretty interesting. I like how they get good detail, the architecture, how the stones were laid across. That's pretty cool. That's also pretty common, having longer flat stones. So that was pretty cool. I like that too. All right, so before we get into kind of what's in the tombs, let's look at, besides the obvious, let's look at this is actually the burial mound of Emperor Jung of the Han Dynasty in China. Now, he ruled 188 BC to 141 BC. So over 2,000 years ago. Again, another burial mound, which is a burial ground. Very large complex. He's definitely kind of a prominent landscape feature here. And his reign actually coincided with a lot of rebellion. The rebellion of the 7 states, which is what we call it today, happened during his reign. So it was, like many leaders, he definitely saw some animosity, but he was definitely kind of along with the times of the ancient not Neolithic, ancient peoples of doing the burial mounds. So it's definitely something that's a pretty cool tourist attraction. Obviously, this is an earthen mound, as they meant to be. A lot of what you'll see, especially with the mounds in Asia, have a lot of tree cover. You see some here. We'll see some from Japan that will have even more. And that was pretty common, just because it was meant to kind of look more like a mountain. It was meant to be hidden. You'll hear a lot. There's a few. There's a pyramid. I call it more of a pyramid. It's a burial mound, but it's definitely more of a pyramid of where, you see the terracotta army have resided. And that was the in the tomb of Qian Shi Hong. I probably said that wrong, so please forgive me. But he was if I'm not mistaken, he was the first emperor of the Qing Dynasty which was predating all this. And in fact, let's go ahead and take a look at his tomb real quick. I think that'll be pretty interesting to see. Hang on a second. All right, so as you can see, this is where the tomb is. This is where the famed terracotta army is, which is what his army was, kind of a representation of his army that he was taking with him to the afterlife. And yeah, it looks like a mountain. I mean, honestly, it just looks like a mountain. It's that massive. And it is obviously not something people are really able to go see. I mean, there you can go see it, but it's not something that you can just walk up. It's considered to be pretty sacred. There's expeditions all over the world, but this is a sacred. I think there was a lot of traps. So there's a river of mercury running through it because he kind of he had a commissioned scale representation of his capital city inside, and instead of water, it was mercury, which was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was kind of alluded to be the elixir of life to some extent. If I'm not mistaken about that, then we all know that it actually is a mistake, that that's the elixir of life. Just look at the Mad Hatter. But yeah, so it was considered sacred, and there's even one similar situation similar to this. The tomb of Chingus Khan is supposedly, if that's where his tomb is, not here, but in Mongolia, if this particular mountain is where his tomb is, then it's also a sacred place. You do not walk up it, you revere it, you stay away. So yeah, now this is not just a tomb, it's also a necropolis. So that's a little different than just a regular simple burial mound. This is probably the mound of burial mounds. So that's pretty cool. I wanted to show you that one. Okay, so moving on to Korea. These are a few burial mounds in Korea. Again, these are very more simplistic burial mounds. But as I was stating, a lot of the Korean burial mounds, especially those of the Joseon Dynasty, and again, forgive me if I pronounce that wrong. They were really, because that dynasty lasted until just before World War One. 1910 was actually I think the final year of that dynasty, but it had lasted for almost 650 years. They were creating these tombs up until the 1800s, if not further, if not into the 1900s. I doubt really after the end of the dynasty. But we do have a little bit different with some of the Korean and the tombs in Asia, and I'd like to show you those. So this is actually the tomb of King Seong-jung. Again, please forgive me. And this tomb is pretty established in the city. I mean, you got a Ramada right there. So it's pretty, I mean, this was a tomb meant to be visited. A lot of tombs you'll see were not meant to be visited. They were hidden. People didn't want them to know their stories. Obviously, we know Valley of the Kings, they were hidden to prevent grave robbers. Others, same situation, or it was considered sacred. It was considered, cursed to go up to those tombs and disturb them, because you would be disturbing a divine person. Remember, a lot of kings had the divine right to rule aspect. So for here as well, to see this, you're looking at it like, wow, they want homage. You kind of can see that this is meant to be a presentation kind of display, which is nice. It is pretty cool to see that. Other tombs, like I said, you just didn't even know they were there. The Chingus Khan burial site supposedly was trampled by horses, and to make the ground look like it hadn't been disturbed, and everyone that knew about it was killed. Attila the Hun, they did something similar, or then there's stories that they actually diverted a river to flow over his grave. So there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot that goes with that. Uh, and now, so this, if I'm not mistaken, from what research I've done, this king here, and I think actually might be his not only a king but the queen as well, his wife, one of his wives, um, is actually from 14, like the late, basically the late 15th century, around 1490s. So this one's been here quite a while. You see kind of a lot of weathering on the statues, which is kind of cool to see. Definitely something if you go to Korea. I've had a couple opportunities to go. I have not gone. I've had the opportunities though, and I think I will try to take up the next opportunity I get because this would be something cool to see. Just the history of Korea. If you're ever interested in learning some really cool history, I would suggest Korean history is a great place to really get some really awesome information and research. A lot of Asian history is really cool. Be honest with you. So it's just something I know a lot of fantasy focuses on European stuff, especially British Isles or Germanic, but we really need to look more into Asian history. Just the beauty of it is there. So that's my soapbox for that. Now let's get into some fantasy though. Speaking of fantasy, let's get into some fantasy. What do we see? Okay, so before we get into the fantasy stuff, I forgot. No, let's talk about the actual graves. So a lot of them we know from Egypt. You most famous King's Tut's tomb, other tombs. I think they uh, Nefertiti was found. Nefertiti was found in one of them. But we have here what's what we considered a Norse Viking style burial. We have another one that's not quite as blurry. But here, I just want to point out the weaponry, the goods that he used during life, what he would need to use in later life. And as I said, I have one that's not quite as blurry, and it shows a woman, which is going to come into play from what I'm going to show you here. Not what's behind me, but somewhere else. But again, the bow and arrows, stuff from her daily life, foodstuffs, blanket. You gotta have a blanket, and just a peaceful posture. And this is what we're seeing in tombs now. Now, we said that a lot of times people didn't want you to go to the tombs, cursed or what have you. Well, this is the high fells. We see the high fells of Rudar. Now, this is a prominent feature in the Desolation of Smog movie. This is where the Witch King of Agmar and the other 8 wraiths were imprisoned after they died. Sort of died. They're liches, so they didn't really die, but they're dead already. It's kind of like a vampire. Are you dead? You're not dead. You're undead. Same with the lich. So, and I'm probably gonna get some flack for that. But anyway, it's the staircase, one small entrance, and that entrance led to something else that Gandalf found in the movie. And here are the tombs. So there's 1, 2, and it was pretty precarious. And Radiat scared the living shit out of them and almost made them fall. And that was pretty funny. And I always like this scene because it actually is a little bit of a historical backstory scene, but not everyone likes it, and I understand. But that is a Tolkien aspect of funeraries, a burial mound or burial. We do see in Lord of the Rings Boromir being sent off the waterfall in a boat with his belongings, minus the gauntlets. Aragorn picks those up, takes them. Which, he's got that gun door. So we see in a few instances, we do see, especially in Rohan, you do have some burial mounds, smaller, very much smaller, Anglo-Saxon style. So that's pretty cool to see too. Let's look at a couple others here. It's hard for me to get away from Elder Scrolls and Skyrim, and I love the game so much. It's such a popular game, and this is Shady, Heath, Barrow. Now, this is one that a lot of people in the game, stay away from. There's definitely draugr in there. There's all kinds of evil in there, and some loot too. There's a lot of loot. Now this here is just typical, is a typical style barrow of the game, and it is, you know, a typical style looking mound. However, it has this entrance here, and I know it's kind of hard to tell, but it has this entrance here, and I like that because I kind of equate that to something else in history. We're back at Howe, and this is the entrance here. So as you can see, there is an entrance to it. It's bricked up, and it's definitely purposeful of an entrance. So this is kind of like a very, if you take away the grass and you're just left with the brick and the stone, it's similar to what you would see in the barrow of Skyrim. Now, Skyrim had a few others that were pretty prominent. Hilgren's tomb is one, and again, here's the entrance, built into, if I'm not mistaken, that was built into a pretty big mountain. It's been a while since I've actually been there, and it again serves as a purpose. There's crypts in there, and it's kind of like a necropolis more than anything. And a lot of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim tombs are necropolises. They have multiple tombs in them, and so let's talk about that, because I have something of an announcement to make, and I want to kind of start sharing some things in my videos with it. So let's take a look. Now, everybody's seeing, now it's going to be kind of weird. It's like, you can see the thing behind me, and here it is right here too. Like, ooh. That's nice right there. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, enough screwing around. Everyone knows I do Patreon. I do maps, battle maps. And that is a tough community to crack. I'm gonna tell you right now. But anyway, the battle maps that I'm doing here, that I'm gonna showcase here today, are indicative of what you would see in fantasy, but also historical, with a little bit more geared toward the fantasy, such as this one here. This is a maze tomb burial mound. As you can see, kind of the mound around it, built up around it, and then the maze. Here's the entrance, the burial. And you got to have gold in there, gold and gems, and this is just something so people can play. I do like the hexes, especially when you're going around curves. I had a couple questions about using hexes. I dig them. It's not something I always put into every map. I dig them. I like it. But this is a good style D&D map. I mean, look at that. I mean, right there, that little corner, that's perfect with a hex. With the squares, you might not fit right. But here, you know, you have the burial chamber. I bricked up the burial chamber. I didn't brick up the rest, but you can kind of assume that it probably is. But I have a few others similar to that. And I want to show one real quick before I make my big announcement. One with another burial style. Okay, this is another burial mound. Again, this is pretty simple. You got the mound around it. It's pretty simple. I went with the squares on this one. But you have the goods and you have the boat. So here's the actual burial right here. And that's their boat. They have their sword. Kind of can see it. Jewels, items that they have. You can kind of think of these are probably retainers to some extent, servants. They would have taken them. Different aspects of their life and barrels, food, just different sort of offerings, I guess you could say. But here's a tomb, so you would want to go through there. But this is, you know, again, it's that Nordic style tomb of on a ship, or in this case, a rowboat. But you know, things like that. Just something kind of cool to have. A little fantasy aspect to it, rooted in history, like most of what I try to incorporate. So I'm in the process of writing the next book in the Carolingian Age series. Now, this book will take place after the Dead Queen's War. No, I'm sorry, excuse me, not Dead Queen's War. That's a long ways off. This book will take place after a court of dreams and shadows. It incorporates a character that was introduced in that book as a child. She is now an adult, and it is Rowena. She is the illegitimate daughter of King Charles of Loch Calla. She is a half dwarven, half human, and she is trying to make a mark for herself, a name for herself. And she a formidable warrior. There's going to be a lot of again, a lot of battles, a lot of war in the book. Hoping to have it released in January of next year of 2022. So we're hoping that it goes well and everything. There's going to be a lot of it's going to be a different direction, and it will actually also tie in another book that I'm working on that I put on the back burner. That is a both of these books will kind of serve as spinoffs to other series. But Empty Palace is happening kind of around the same time, whereas this book with Arena, which it is titled Scorned, is going to be about a 20-year period, and so it's going to be a tough one for that period, but it's going to be worth it in the end. But it also is going to incorporate a lot more cultural aspects from history into this. And one cultural aspect is the idea of burial mounds that we're going to discuss and see. And this is Queen, I might have given it away, giving some away, Rorena's burial chamber. Again, it's a mound style. I didn't put the mound around it just because of the fact that it would I mean, it's already pretty packed. There's water here, so it's going to be near a river, but it will have a mound aspect of it. And again, did have the mound here, so it goes into the ground though through here, richly decorated with mosaics, shrines, obviously her wealth, and then the tomb of herself. It's a smaller casket. She is a half dwarf, and half human, so her height is actually below average of a human, but very, very formidable woman, and which you'll see in the book. So this is actually going to be her tomb. This is where she ends up. So a tomb is of this magnitude, this size, and obviously it's for a battle map. I did not put the grid in it as of yet, but obviously a tomb of this size, you're looking at somebody who was revered, and that's what we're trying to get across with this book. And I say we collectively just because it's me, but I do have some supporters with my family, so thank you for that. But yes, this is a working model, and this will be available at some point on my Patreon as a battle map. And I am not going to make this a paid map. This will be a free map as a gift when the book is released, probably before it gets released. But this will be a free map in my Patreon. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. Or a little bit. I don't go into a whole lot of detail on a lot of things. I go into a little bit of detail on a lot of things. So I hope you guys got some information about it. I definitely want to chat more. You can always put some stuff in the comments. What you want to see. Check me out on my Patreon. Links are in the description. And thank you to all those who have supported me on Patreon, social media, Reddit, everywhere. I really appreciate you guys. So I hope to see you soon, and just keep looking out for more videos, like and subscribe, and we'll be back next time. Thanks.